Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. While Jesus was speaking, up came one of the officials who bowed low in front of him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and her life will be saved." And Jesus rose, and with his disciples followed him. Then from behind him came a woman who had suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years, and she touched the fringe of his cloak, for she said to herself, "If I can only touch his cloak, I shall be well again." Jesus turned round and saw her, and he said to her, "Courage, my daughter, your faith has restored you to health." And from that moment the woman was well again. When Jesus reached the official's house and saw the flute players with the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Get out of here, the little girl is not dead, she is asleep." And they laughed at him. When the people had been turned out, he went inside and took the little girl by the hand, and she stood up, and the news spread all round the countryside. The Gospel of the Lord. The story or the life of Maria Goretti, with this like here, with deaths and a young girl dying, there's nothing extraordinary really in her birth or her upbringing. Born in Ancona in the north of Italy, again during times of very hardship and depression in many ways, bad land. And her father made a decision with the mother and the children to bring them away from bad land. Imagine trying to look after stony soil. It's a bit like Ireland in the famine. And there they travelled by train the whole way to Rome, and from Rome to a kind of horrendous place called the Pontine Marshes. And anybody who's lived abroad, you know what mosquitoes do. So if you live in a land that's covered in marshes, and the idea was the Italian state was trying to drain the marshes, and if you could drain marshes, you got rid of mosquitoes. And if you got rid of mosquitoes, you got rid of malaria. So her father took on this opportunity to help his family, numerous children, 6 or 7 of them, and brought them down there into a malaria-ridden place to work, given a small farm, utter poverty, where the whole family will work. And it's there that he takes in a man to help him drain this land, Alessandro Serenelli, and his father. The father of this young man, who would eventually become the murderer of Maria Goretti, he was a drunkard, he was a tough man, he had a difficult marriage, we don't know anything about his wife, and his younger son, Alessandro, who was brought to help, was even at that time looking at newspapers, as Maria Goretti says, newspapers that weren't things that he shouldn't have been looking at. It was the earlier days of pornography in many ways. So this is in the mind of this young man, about 19 years of age. He's working on the farm. Eventually, Maria Goretti's father would get malaria and he'll die. So you could imagine the devastation in the family. The mother and all these children, with a strange man living in the house with them and his son. And they continued to work the farm, but the young fella had his eye on Maria Goretti, young 14-year-old, and had it planned, as it always is, had it planned that he would get her alone in the house. And when he did get her alone in the house, he attempted to rape her at the age of 14 years of age. And she tried to stop him as best she could, and she pleaded with him for the sake of his soul. Imagine a 14-year-old saying that to a 19-year-old. For the sake of your soul, stop. I want you to get to heaven. Don't do this. Anyway, he didn't get what he wanted, and he stabbed her 14 times. You imagine the little half-hungry child, 14-year-old girl, and stabbing her 14 times on the floor. He muffled her mouth with a scarf so she couldn't scream. And her little brother was outside in a cot, screaming and crying. And because the baby cried, the mother came running in to find her 14-year-old with 14 stab wounds in her little body, so bad that her intestines were even coming out of her body. She lived for another 24 hours, but basically she got blood poisoning very quickly. They did everything they could for 2 hours to save her, and they couldn't even give her a drink of water because it would speed up her death. They couldn't do it to her. So she died, but as she was dying, she forgave him. And that's what she's a real martyr for, her forgiveness. She forgave him. He was bundled off. He was nearly killed by a mob, by the way, and he ended up for 30 years in prison in Rome, 30 years in prison. After 10 years of being angry and justifying himself, she appears to him in a dream. And she says, "I forgive you. I forgive you." Could you imagine the shock of it? She forgives him. He'll spend another 20 years there. In 1950, Maria Goretti is canonized with her mother present at the it's the first time ever that a mammy was present at the canonization in 1950. The mother would eventually return back to Ancona. Her children will be taken into care. It's a complete devastation of a family, you know. Even Maria Goretti's sister lived in the great train station of Rome, Termini, where she begged. Imagine your sister's a saint, and yet you have to beg to survive. The great miracle really was on a Christmas Eve. Alessandro Serenelli, after his release from prison, went to the mother's house and knocked on the door, and the mother recognized him. Of course she did. Could you imagine the anger of a mother who'd watched her poor little child savaged alive, you know? And she met him at the door and she said, if my daughter has forgiven you, well, I have to forgive you. And that night at midnight mass, there's a very famous picture of Alessandro Serenelli and Maria Goretti's mother kneeling at the altar rails together and receiving Holy Communion. That's the miracle. That's the miracle of forgiveness. It's a hard one for us to understand, but that's what Christ does. And this is really what the gospel today is. Even in death, Jesus will make something beautiful. Even in tragedy, he'll make something beautiful. So if you have unforgiveness in your heart, not just chastity and issues, although we all have those things, she's the martyr of forgiveness. That this little 14-year-old will triumph over everything else, over all the evil, the depravity and the sorrow and the poverty of life, that Jesus made something very beautiful, a wonderful little saint today. And she's a powerful little one if you pray to her. So invoke her today if you find it hard to forgive someone. She'll help you. She'll help you. I wouldn't mess with a 14-year-old martyr. They're tough cookies in heaven, let me tell you. She's loved in Rome, she's loved in Italy and throughout the world. So let's invoke her for young people today, and particularly for all of us who have unforgiveness in our hearts, for the times we've been hurt and betrayed by others.